right, what's up, Shellheads? Welcome to a new series here on the channel Turtles 101. This is where we are going to take different series, different continuities, characters, concepts from the Turtles universe and break them down and cover them. I released on the channel a ranking video of every one of the series. If you haven't checked that out, go ahead and go check that out. But one of the big things that I heard from that is for a lot of you guys watching, your favorite Turtles iteration is the 1987 cartoon, the one that goes from 87 to 96. That was formative for a lot of people in their love for the Turtles. It was formative for me in my love for the Turtles. Now, where I rank all of the series, you can head on over there and check that out. But I figured, what better spot than starting with season one of the cartoon that really, in a lot of ways, started it all with Turtles in the animated and movie medium. So we're starting with the miniseries that kicked off, that is season one. It's a 5 episode arc that really introduces us to the world of the Turtles. Now, the big thing that needs to be mentioned is this is one of the first times that we see an IP that's creating a cartoon that's based on something outside of toys. Now, a lot of the Turtles' contemporaries at this time, Transformers, G.I. Joe, stuff like that, it started off as a toy. This is actually based off of the Mirage Comics run that just started a couple of years before. But the really interesting thing about this is a lot of what we have come to know about the Turtles, as far as characteristics, as far as characters, a lot of the exaggerated differences between the Turtles actually come from the cartoon, this cartoon. The original Mirage run was black and white, and they actually make a joke by way of April in the first episode that a lot of the turtles seem almost exactly the same, where she can't remember who is who and gets everybody's name wrong. And so, if you were coming to this by way of the Mirage run, this was actually a really big difference and a really big jump. Namely, because in the 80s, everything was cartoons were a giant infomercial for the toys. The idea was that companies would greenlight these cartoons with the idea of selling toys. And this is no different. And we'll get into this. But this was selling toys to an entirely different demographic than the Mirage comics had been geared towards up until that point. For those of you that don't know, Peter Laird and Kevin Eastman created the Mirage run that created the Turtles, influenced by guys like Jack Kirby, guys like Frank Miller, famously so Daredevil. And so there's a gritty nature and a hard edge to the original comics run. And if you know anything about this iteration of the Turtles, this is exactly not that, because the toys were being marketed to kids. And the thing about this is, sometimes for better, sometimes for worse, this show knows exactly what it is and does not try to change any of that. But I think the brilliance of this show is that it's both reduced, and by that I mean, for kids, I come with all due respect. Like you guys have heard me say in other videos, everybody has their version of the Turtles. This show is for 9, 10-year-olds and doesn't pretend to be anything other than that. But the stylistic choices that they make still have a grit to them. You still believe that they are in dirty New York and that there is stake and consequences, especially in this season one miniseries that kicks this off. And I would argue that the way that they presented season one is why, or at least a significant reason why, Turtles really took off the way that it did. And I think in a lot of respects, you can thank this first season that we're going to get into for the movies and the video games and what became Turtle Mania. And I think that there were choices made moving on from this season that if that was how they led, I'm not sure that the series would have taken off to the same degree. I think it will still absolutely would have taken off, but I'm not sure it would have had the same huge impact that it ended up having. So now that we've set the table, let's kick into the actual episodes and break down the actual episodes themselves. Episode one was called Turtle Tracks. We open up with New York City experiencing a crime wave, and we're introduced to series and IP longtime character and staple April O'Neil, who discovers that the thieves are ninjas. And I have a note here that the assumption that it's ninjas and the reason why they give that they assume that it's ninjas shows its age, but it's supposed to be tongue in cheek for kids. So I kind of had a laugh, but it definitely showed its age. And we see a street gang attack April, and to get away from them, she escapes into the sewers where we're introduced to four large talking turtles who end up defeating the thugs and take April back to their lair. Now, one of the things that I find interesting about this is I don't think anybody would be surprised to say that in the 80s, they treated women in media differently. And I wish I could say that it was only up until the 80s, but they were used more as plot devices. And yes, of course, we have to have the woman faint and that obligatory scene that was really prevalent in at this time and when this IP was being created. But in a lot of respects, you have this woman who is being showcased as strong, at least by the standards of the late 80s, and being given this agency. So I thought that was really cool. And even from the beginning salvo, you are thrust right into this world that is already moving and already active. And it feels like this is a world that existed before the cameras turned on. And I think they squared that circle really well of making it feel like kids were stepping into something that was alive in that regard. And so you're thrust right into this world. And so April meets the turtle's mentor, an oversized rat named Splinter. And this is where you get the backstory as it's depicted in the cartoon. Now we'll get into the backstory as it originally is portrayed in the comics, but here we're given more of a simplistic take on the relationship between Hamato Yoshi, which is the human name of Splinter, and the turtles. That Hamato Yoshi is kicked out of the clan that he was a part of, made to live in the sewers, befriended some turtles, and came across ooze that turned whatever came in contact with it into the last thing that they touched. So, because the turtles last touched a human, they turned into humanoid turtles. And the last thing that Hamato Yoshi touched was a rat. And so he turned into an oversized rat. This is where you begin to also get the origins of the clan that Hamato Yoshi comes from. And you start to see some of the backstory of Oroku Saki as well, who we'll come to find is the Shredder. And after the exposition dump, the Turtles and April go out to investigate the streets for the thieves to find out more, and they discover a group of robot ninjas whose uniform Splinter recognizes as belonging to the Foot Clan, which is the clan that he originally was a part of. But before April can expose them, she's kidnapped by the Shredder, and that's where we transition to episode 2. Now, a couple of notes. I thought it was hilarious that Granny, as they're investigating the streets, Granny just straight up pulls a gun. That now, mind you, it's we only see laser bullets, which was a big thing at this point in time and going into the 90s, where every all of the weapons shoot lasers rather than bullets, but Granny's packing heat. And the robots in the original iteration and other iterations, these are humans, but having them be robots allowed for the turtles to slice through their enemies and allowed for that action to take place unimpeded by, well, this means that the turtles are out here killing everybody. And so it gave an ability for them to have these big set pieces, these big action pieces, without having to worry about the issue of the turtles killing. And so we pick up with episode 2, where the Foot Clan leader, Oroku Saki, the Shredder, decides, along with his partner, Krang from Dimension X, to turn two thugs into mutant henchmen. And so this is where we get the introduction of Krang, who's actually made famous by this series. Now, we've seen Krang in a lot of other versions of the Turtles that we are going to cover, but this is where we see the genesis of this character, who would then go and make his first comic appearances in the Archie Comics run of the Turtles. This is also where we get the introduction of fan favorites Bebop and Rocksteady. But famously, these were creations of the show, and while fans loved these two, Eastman and Laird did not. And so, because they weren't a part of the original Mirage run and weren't byproducts of Eastman and Laird, that's why they were not used in the movies, and famously that's why we get Toka and Razor. And so we get the backstory of Shredder, and we get the breakdown of his history. We get the backstory, more backstory, that it was Shredder that actually created Splinter and the Turtles, in the same way that he now creates Bebop and Rocksteady. And so Bebop turns into a mutant warthog, Rocksteady turns into a mutant rhino, and they go out with foot soldiers and kidnap Splinter. And so now it's time for the Turtles to go and rescue him from another giant toy in the Technodrome. Now, I say this tongue in cheek, but especially as we continue on into the later episodes of this run, guys, this is a toy commercial. And so we see these big things that, yeah, it was cool to see how each one of these pieces, there's so much influence from this run of the Turtles on the video games that I grew up on. And you saw so many little nods and things like that. Also, the one-liners that are starting to come out here are just hilarious. Does the phrase "go suck on a lemon" hold anything for you? That had me cracking up. I went back and watched these original episodes in preparation for doing this video, and guys, it had me laughing, and the nostalgia was absolutely there. And so we are every episode thus far is introducing us to more of this world. And I think that this is something that this version of the Turtles really gets right. They are really unpacking this world in a way that brings it vibrantly, quote unquote, off the page. And so we jump into episode 3, where we're introduced to the scientist Baxter Stockman. Though, for those of you that are longtime Turtles fans, this is pre Giant Mutant Fly Boss Baxter Stockman. We actually don't get Fly Boss Baxter Stockman until the video games. And so this is just a kind of a down on his luck scientist who's just trying to create his invention of rat seeking robots named Mousers. I actually forgot that that's where they got their name. I knew that they were called Mousers, but I forgot that that was where they got their name. And because of this tool that he's creating, Shredder employs his help and gives him an opportunity to mass produce his invention. The thing that I walked away from this episode, I know that Baxter Stockman is a villain of the Turtles, and you see him, especially in other iterations, become more of a villain towards the Turtles. But the Turtles were almost like the bad guys in these situations because this guy's just trying to create his invention. And it just felt a little like he's getting roped in with Shredder. And yes, sure, Shredder's using his tool, but doesn't it just seemed like this is a guy who's just trying to do his thing and is in the wrong place at the wrong time. But because of the tools, they go and are able to find Splinter, thus finding the turtles' lair. And so after the initial Mauser attack, the turtles and Splinter go and hide in April's apartment. But before we transition into episode 4, this was where I saw for the first time a recontextualization of some of that grit of the original run, where you had Raph with one of his sai at the throat of the bad guy saying, or else I'm going to get sarcastic. It is what it is. It's meant for kids, all of that kind of stuff. But this is where they really marry those two worlds. And I definitely appreciated it. And so we kick into episode 4, and we get Shredder opening a portal to Dimension X for the first time, and 3 teenage kids known as the Neutrinos, as well as 2 of Krang's Stone Warriors, emerge. And after the obligatory, oh, this is a bad guy, wait, we're actually on the same side scene, the Turtles befriend the Neutrinos. But they are confronted by the 2 Stone Warriors. And this is the first time that we see General Trag and the setup for a special weather making device that causes trouble. I laughed hard when he's going through the settings for weather and gets to total chaos. Hilarious. But this is also where we get the first appearance of the Turtles van. I had a Turtles van growing up, and so I saw that and it was immediately taken to my youth. It was absolutely hilarious. We transition into episode 5, where Shredder transmits a message to the Turtles showing off a retro mutagen gun that could turn Splinter back into a human, but would also turn the turtles back into their regular turtle selves. And so Splinter, of course, has to go off on his own to go stop Shredder himself because he can't risk the turtles being turned back into regular turtles. We cut to Shredder with Krang, and this is where we get the completion of Krang in the form of his new body. And I actually didn't realize it wasn't until episode 5, the end of this miniseries, that we get the famous bodysuit of Krang, where Krang is the brain inside of this bodysuit. And we get the Frankenstein moment of "it's alive." Then the turtles come to help Shredder, and they have to deal with Krang and his new body. And we get this scene where Krang grows to monumental sizes, and you get this big kaiju-esque moment of Krang being the big monster destroying the city. And the turtles need to employ the use of ba, 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 another toy, where we see the turtle blimp. We see the big action set piece of the turtles defeating Krang, and Splinter destroys the mutagen gun to save the turtles from Shredder. They try to open another portal to Dimension X, but Donnie reverses the polarity of the portal and causes the entire Technodrome to be pulled into Dimension X. And we end off with Shredder stuck in Dimension X, and we see Shredder take off his mask for the first time. And this continued subservience to Krang, that Krang is actually the brains of the operation, tongue in cheek, and Shredder is kind of following Krang's orders in a lot of regards. And so we end on the turtles going out on a news broadcast from April O'Neil outing the turtles, openly talking about how the turtles exist and that they are this force for good. And we see a series of different takes on how people think about the turtles and all of that. For as much as I love this series, for as much as I will sit here and give it its flowers and talk about how wonderful it is, I actually wonder if that was the best option. I like the idea of the turtles working from the shadows rather than them being outed. And I think later seasons kind of lose something when they're operating as this openly acknowledged force for good. This opening season of TMNT is what a lot of people remember when they remember this series. Yeah, the other seasons have high notes, and we'll cover all of that, but this really hit on all cylinders and really captured a lot of the essence of the turtles. And I wonder again if this is something that would have hit as strongly if they didn't make these choices after the fact, if they led with these choices. And so, one of my biggest takeaways from watching back through all of this is I see why this captured the hearts and minds of kids. This is fun. This doesn't try to be anything more than it is. And I can absolutely see why this was the inspiration for what would go on and actually end up being a big reason why this show ended in the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. That this was the template that built what MMPR would become in its American version. Yes, the actual concept of Power Rangers is based off of Super Sentai, but the American version, Saban, absolutely took a page out of TMNT in making them teenagers with attitude, to use Power Rangers wording. And so it's actually funny to me that this is really the genesis of surfer language and the belts with the letters of their names on them to differentiate who the different turtles were, and to see these exaggerated character differences start to take shape that would go on to define the personality of the turtles over time. You have Mikey as the one that is way more laid back. You have Raph as the one who is the angry, hard edged one. You have Donnie as the one that's more of the tech guy, and Leo as one that is the leader. And so you see, as these 5 episodes go on, that those character models start to take shape and give more individual personality and agency to each one of the turtles that we are going to see continued to grow and take more shape as these seasons continue. But man, this is just nostalgic fun. And I would say that if you've never gone back and watched this iteration of the Turtles, check it out. You can find this in a lot of different spots. There are episodes that are out on YouTube that you can check out, but I would suggest going through and watching this, at least these 5 episodes, because this is kind of a greatest hits in a lot of ways of what the fun side of the turtles are. No, it's not incredibly deep in storytelling, but there's a lot happening in this first season that sets the table for other seasons and other versions of the turtles. Y'all, this was a blast to cover. So I want you guys to let me know, what is your favorite episode of this first season? And I want you guys to chime in down in the comment section and let me know what else you want to see me cover. Make sure that if you're not already subscribed, that you hit subscribe, you like this video, do the whole algorithm thing so that way I can say these things and be a real YouTuber, and make sure that you hit the notification bell so that way you are notified when I put out the next episode of Turtles 101, where I'm going to be breaking down season 2 of this run of the Turtles. Until next time, Cowabunga.